if we look at Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, I believe that they're going like to get to a point where data will be finite on the web, and they're essentially going to train the large language model on the same set of data. And they're no longer going like to have the advantage over the companies. And how companies are going like to get their unfair advantage is by their own data. It's their financial data. How can I interpret the data that is meaningful to my customer?
Yeah.
And how can I provide that back to them in a better way compared to what I had before?
So, Quentin, Reul.
Hi.
Quentin Reul, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to sit down with you. You were like, I think when we first met, we were at an AI conference, and you're the expert in AI, and I'm the philosopher of AI, and we just talked I think we kind of dominated the room with a lot of conversations.
Yeah, it was a very interesting summit.
Yeah.
A very great advertising video. I don't know if you did it, but that was awesome. But
I think that was Jim Schweitzer did that. Yeah.
The audience was not quite what I was expecting. I was not expecting like to be one in a. Well, it was not the library where it was close to it. It was a range of people from experts to your grandma.
Yeah.
And just trying like to understand what AI meant and how that was going to impact that life. That was very interesting. And I think that the organizer at the end of the day were happy like to have us in the room, but also kind of a bit miffed because they could not really go like for the stories that they had planned so much time on, and they were just kind of always having us and others interrupting as they were speaking. So that was definitely interesting.
They were asking, I didn't think it was going to be that stimulating, but it was really engaging. I felt like, wow, this is cool. Because there's so many big, my big one was AI is not a deity. I think people think that there's some type of ominous sort of presence to this, that it's going to do something. But at this point, AI is just computational, right?
Yeah, like it's not general intelligence in as much as it's not able to answer every question without being prompted.
Right.
And yes, we've seen such tremendous advancement over the past 18 months, especially with GPT and all of these things and generative AI. At the same time, there is still a lot of work. Like if you try, like I was doing a course recently, and one part of the course was asking the AI to do reasoning. So it was, I have 20 bananas, I buy another 10, and I gave away 8. How many bananas do I have left?
Right.
And it came back with 36. And it was really because it didn't have like the right reasoning associated with it. Like at the end of the day, generative AI is really about predicting the next token or the next 2 token or the next 3 token.
Right.
So it's more about language and trying to generate something that may be meaningful based on what they had seen before, but not necessarily trying like to replace human in their critical thinking or in their ability to reason and do things.
Yeah, and we'll get there hopefully one day. But the interesting thing, I want to go back just a little bit. So you're early in your education. In 2000, you got started as an undergrad, but kind of moving through your education, you did a PhD in philosophy. But you were doing something, you were investigating ontology, which is kind of, it's what, getting 2 sets of systems to respect the fact that they're independent systems, but they can communicate?
Well, that was my research. So like to go back like to my undergrad, I was actually doing computing science and AI.
Okay.
So back in 2000, a lot of the things that we were seeing were about expert system, rule-based system, or early NLP. Computationally, it was very, very expensive compared to what we had on. And for these rule-based system, one of the things that they wanted like to reach was an abstraction level. So if you create a rule about Jimi is doing something or Quentin is doing something, well, you're going to have to write a lot of rules. But now if you say like a person is doing something, then if you say that Jimi is a person, Quentin is a person, you have created a rule at a higher level, and every instance of that object then can be used. Yeah. And that's really where the ontology came from. But one of the problems with the ontologies is that people in different domain or even within the domain tend to use different terminology. So the terminology that is meaningful to you when it comes to medical domain or the terms that would be relevant to me may not necessarily be the same.
Right.
So my PhD was about looking at, given two people having created these structures, can we try like to get some interoperability between these systems by understanding what is the schema and how the information or in the schema kind of map to one another?
I know not to go too far into this, but that sort of underlies your expertise in AI, understanding that we're talking about large language models that need to interpret vast amounts of data, and thinking about the marketplace, we're not coordinating that data yet in any high volume outside of large language models, because everybody, in the last couple weeks, I've talked to a number of people that are wanting to create their own AIs. But as we've talked, it's really about understanding how to create your data set in a way that the AI can look at it and make the best judgment about what priority is.
Yeah. So like to go back to the generative AI like kind of model and the tokenization of what they're predicting, if it speaks about Apple, it may say like, or at a farm, I will find an apple.
Yeah.
But it could also say like, I'm a software engineer and I work at Apple, depending. Yep. But does it really know what Apple in these two contexts is? No, because at the end of the day, in the training set in the LLM today, there is no disambiguation. So Apple, as in the company, doesn't have its own identifier as opposed to Apple as a fruit. So where data comes in and things like ontology can help is really in bringing that higher level of the context in terms of saying, well, I have this entity and now I can put additional information at that entity. So if I ask a question about Apple as a company and I've said, well, its headquarter is in Palo Alto, then I can return that information without having like to predict, because it's kind of that higher level of information or data that you're providing. And to go back to your data question, I think that ultimately, if we look at Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, I believe that they're going like to get to a point where data will be finite on the web, and they're essentially going to train the large language model on the same set of data. And they're no longer going like to have the advantage over the companies. And how companies are going like to get their unfair advantage is by their own data. It's their financial data. How can I interpret the data that is meaningful to my customer?
Yeah.
And how can I provide that back to them in a better way compared to what I had before?
Yeah, I think that's what's exciting, because as we've talked about things, most of my career has been spent on recording data, recording information that people share among themselves about their whatever R&D they're doing in their business, whatever kind of future state they're imagining. But companies having digital identities are going to be the game changer, that we're not feeding those systems yet. But I think that's what Talk Lab has been built on, that idea that with enough information, you can understand things differently. And now we have this AI language model that we could really hone in on predictive stuff, or even just a lot of times people feel stuck. They just like, well, what do we do next? And you can ask, what's next?
Yeah, and I think like one of the big things that we have seen in the enterprise as well over the years is, especially with the generation, like the generation boomers from the 1940s that are now starting to retire, is that all of that corporate knowledge is kind of is going away or being lost. It's not going away. People are retiring, which is the right thing for them to do after, But that all of that knowledge, because it's tribal or because it's something that they didn't always have an incentive to share. For a lot of people, that knowledge that they have is how they're insured to get a job tomorrow. And therefore, they didn't necessarily want to share that knowledge with like the company or record it. But I think now, moving forward, that is only going like to be the necessary information to ensure consistency of your message, but also consistency of your brand. Because if you lose someone like that was core to your business, how do you survive?
Yeah,
And especially if other people are doing it and recording all of the information that is relevant and are better able to get that information over time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like why, I mean, this is a really interesting way of putting this, but it's why Sears was ultimately beaten by Amazon. Amazon understood that the data that about each singular product and the reviews that come along with it and the iteration of that ongoing community of people that wanted to produce products and put them out there for the audience is simply beat Sears out. Sears was, here's the product, it's sitting on a shelf, and that's it.
Yeah, and you have many other examples like Blockbuster. Interestingly, you still have red DVDs that are still around, but Blockbuster is gone. Netflix has taken like that business model completely different and has done something out of it. Another example is Kodak. Kodak had the patent for digital like films and cameras, and it still managed to get totally gone. And if you look more generically in the Fortune 500 to 1,000, what you're seeing is that a lot of the companies that were 150 years plus have not really been able to adapt first to the digital transformation with the internet. COVID came and, people have really changed the way that they are kind of interacting with information. And then November 2022 came and, GPT came out and we started seeing a completely demystified world where AI was, right, left, and center of your daily life. And only the companies that are able to harness that power, or to your point earlier, the employees that are able to harness that power are the ones that are going to survive. Everyone else is going to be replaced because they are not going to leverage that additional values that they have. As an author, as a writer, I remember writing my PhD was the most daunting time of my life because every day I would go to my computer and I would have that blank page syndrome and it would never start, or I would have an idea, but I would write it and rewrite it 500 times before I was actually comfortable with it. Now, I just go to Gemini or Copilot and I say, write me a blog on this topic. These are some of the keywords that I want. It should be this amount of, this length. And then I start editing. But I don't have that problem of the blank page syndrome anymore because I can create things in a much more rapid way.
And I live in that space and have tried to help people for decades work through those processes. So I really think about it in this way, most of the time you labor to think about all of the different communication styles of your audience. And then you have to get into, like you said, all of the different, it could be visual communication, it can be written, it can be, have numeric graphs, all these things. And you're working tirelessly to get all that together. And it's not until you're complete with that, you present it, and then maybe even months, years later, you reflect on it and understand that was what I was trying to communicate. That's what I wanted to get across. And I think that's what AI is offering us, is the ability to take very complex ideas, get a first draft of it, and a very complete, very detailed draft. I mean, you can put all of that information into it. And it's not just representative information. It can be very precise, material costs and, projections and imagery and all those things. And then you can step back and reflect. So if you've got a year to write a thesis, you can get, in the first couple of weeks, a game plan that then you can start reflecting on it before you get to the presentation. Because I think that's what kills academia and thinking, is that we work so hard to just get the representation in front of people. And that is what kills projects.